Chapter 8. The Third Worm. Tom ran out of the kitchen of Billy's house, holding the sizzling frying pan out in front of him with both hands, the screen door banging behind him. Alan threw open the barn door when he saw him coming. Tom thumped the frying pan down on the orange grate. "There," he said breathlessly. "Done to a T. Look at her, all golden brown and sizzling. It looks good enough to eat." "Yeah," said Billy. He poked a worm with his fork. Tom took off the pot-holder glove he was wearing. "Think fish," he said. "Remember, think fish. Trout, salmon, flounder, perch. I'll ride my mini bike into church. Eel, salmon, bluegill, trout. Wait till you hear the minister shout. Clam, flounder, tuna, sucker. Look out, here we come. Old Mrs. Tucker. Lobster, blackbait, oyster stew. There goes New Orleans. Here comes Peru." He leaned over Billy and whispered in his ear, "Fish, fish, 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 fish. Go on, take a bite. Fish, 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 fish. Okay, second bite. Fish, fish, fish." Chapter 9. The Plotters. "Geez, you think it'll work?" said Alan to Joe. "Suppose it doesn't. He didn't seem to pay much attention today." "Don't worry," said Joe. "We got him thinking. It takes time. I got it all doped out. Trust me." Chapter 10. The Fourth Worm. Billy ate steadily, grimacing, rubbing his nose, spreading on more horseradish sauce. Tom bent over him, hissing in his ear, "Fish, fish, 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 fish." Billy paused, watching Alan and Joe whispering by the door. He swished the last bite round and round in the ketchup and mustard. All of a sudden he said, "That's not fair. They can't act like that any more. Every time I swallow, they lean forward as if they expected me to kill over or something. And then when I don't, they look surprised and shrug their shoulders and nudge each other." "Come on," said Joe. "Cut it out. We can watch you, for Christ's sake. We're just standing over here by the window watching you." "No, you're not," said Billy. "You're whispering and acting as if you expected something to happen every time I swallow." "It's nothing," said Joe. "Forget it. Look, we'll turn around and look out the window while you swallow." "What do you mean it's nothing?" said Billy. "What's nothing?" "Oh, come on," said Alan. "It's just something Joe's father told the other night. It's nothing." "What? What?" "It was just to worry you," said Alan. "It's crazy. It's nothing. Forget it." Billy told the napkin away from his throat. "Tell me." "It's nothing," said Joe. "You know how my father is. He's always yelling about something." "Tell me or it's all off." "Well, look, it's nothing, but the night before last, I was telling Jenny about you eating the worms, and my father was on the porch and heard us. So he threw down his newspaper and says, 'Joseph.' So I says, 'Yes, Pa.' And he says, 'Have you had the worm, Joseph?' And then he grabbed my shoulders and shook me till my hands danced at the ends of my worms like the puppets. 'It's for your own good,' he says. So I stirred it out. 'It's not going to do me any good if I shake to pieces, is it?' Jenny was wailing. My mother was chewing her apron in the doorway. 'Alfred,' she cries, 'what's he done? You were to arrestinate him. Has he hauled down the American flag at school and eaten it again? Has he?' 'So what's the point?' yelled Billy. 'Get to the point. What's it all have to do with me?' 'I'm coming to it,' said Joe, wiping his nose. 'But I wanted to show you how important it was. My father nearly killing me and all.' He sneezed, and then Alan began to sneeze and finally had to hobble off into one of the horse stalls, hugging his stomach to recover. 'Anyway,' said Joe, wiping his nose again, hitching up his ribeyes. 'So my father told my mother he thought I'd eaten a worm.' 'A what?' says my mother, dropping her apron and clutching the sides of her head. 'A worm,' says my father, nodding solemnly. So my mother fainted, collapsed all helter-skelter right there in the doorway, and lay still, her tongue lolling out of her mouth, her red hair spread out beautifully over the doorsill. So "Will you cut it out?" Billy yelled. "Who cares about your mother? What does it have to do with me? I think it's lying, said Tom. Whoever heard of someone's mother fainting and her tongue hanging out? All right, yelled Joe apologetically, stamping around. All right, now, I won't tell. You can die, Billy Forrester, and you will have to carry him home. Tom growled, all by yourself. Nobody says to me, who cares about your mother? All right, I'm going, Alan, he yelled. They're inserting my mother. I'm going. Don't, said Alan, running out of the horse's stall and grabbing Joe by the shirt tail. Don't. You got to tell him. Even your mother'd say so. Mine too. No matter what it said, ain't it a matter of life and death? I won't, said Joe, starting toward the door. Alan pulled him back. You got to. How long have we known poor Bill? 6, 7 years? For old time's sake, Joe. Because we were all once in the kindergarten together. Think of the agony he will face. Joe, the pain and the blood and the gore. Billy was on his knees by the orange crate, wringing his hands, not daring to interfere. But when Joe glanced suddenly back at him, he whispered, Please, Joe, for old time's sake. Well, will you apologize for insulting my mother? I do, said Billy. I do apologize. So Alan and Joe began to sneeze again, and this time had to bend over and put their hands between their legs to recover. Tom, who had been watching them suspiciously, trying to make out what was going on, started to say something. Shut up, hissed Billy fiercely, turning on him. You keep out of it. So Joe went on with his story, how his mother had been carried upstairs to her room, how the doctor had come shaking his head, how his aunt had sobbed, pulling down all the shades in their house, how the morning his mother had finally come downstairs for the first time, leaning on his aunt's arm, pale and sorrowful. How? Yeah, said Tom. Sure, so why? What does eating worms do to you? Nobody will tell me, said Joe, opening his eyes wide. It's been 3 days now, and nobody will say. It's just like the time my cousin Lucy got caught in the back seat of her father's Chevrolet with the encyclopedia salesman. Nobody will tell me why there was such an uproar. He wiped his mouth. But one thing's sure, it's worse than poison. Probably nuts, said Tom. Oh yeah, said Joe. But then he and Alan had another sneezing fit, sprawling helplessly against each other. Look at them, said Tom to Billy. They're not sneezing, they're laughing. Come on, eat the last piece and let's get out of here. You really think so? Said Billy doubtfully. The sneezing did look an awful lot like giggling. Sure, look at them. Tom gave Alan and Joe a shove. They collapsed in a heap, sneezing uncontrollably. Billy watched them. Yeah, sure, they weren't sneezing. They were laughing, weren't they? Hay fever, guessed Alan. Hay fever. Oh, you never had a hay fever before, said Tom. How about yesterday or the day before? Come on, Billy, open up. So Billy, half believing Tom and half not, glancing doubtfully at Alan and Joe, allowed Tom to poke the last bite of worm into his mouth and let him out of the barn. Alan and Joe sat up. It didn't work, said Alan. Joe began to brush the chaff out of his hair. You wait. He wasn't sure. Tom was, but he isn't eating the worms. You wait. Billy's worried. He was before. That's why he said he felt like he was going to throw up. But now he's really worried. Suppose I wasn't lying. Did you see his face when I said my father shook me? I thought his eyes would bug right out of his head. Alan laughed. Oh, geez. Yeah, and when you said your mother fainted. Jill stopped brushing the chaff out of her hair. Except why do you laugh so much, for Christ's sake? If you'd kept a straight face, even Tom wouldn't have guessed. Oh, you laughed first. What do you mean? Me? I laughed first? I did not. You did so. You laughed when he yelled at you first time. You wiped your nose. They went off through the meadow, arguing. Chapter 11. Tom. Billy pushed the frying pan toward Tom. Okay, Fink, if it's not supposed to hurt you, you eat a piece. Oh no, said Alan. He and Joe were lying on their stomachs in the hayloft watching. If he eats a piece, you lose, Billy. The bet was you were going to eat 15 worms, not you and him together. Billy didn't look up, his eyes fixed grimly on Tom. All right, then I'll go dig another worm. Just for him. He's so big, telling me. Hurry up, I can't wait around all day. Don't be a sissy. All right now. I didn't say sissy, said Tom uncomfortably. I just said if the first 4 worms didn't kill you, this one wouldn't. I can't help it if my mother told me to be home by 2 today. She's going shopping, so I have to mind my brother. Yeah, said Billy. Okay, so we'll just have time for you to eat a worm before you go. Come on, where's the shovel? Here, said Alan from the loft. We brought an extra today. A worm dangled, squirming from his fingers. He dropped it to Billy. It's not cooked, said Tom. I'll do it, said Joe, scrambling down the ladder. He took the worm from Billy and ran out, then ran back and grabbed the frying pan. Tom sat down on an overturned pail to wait. He didn't want to eat any worm. It wasn't his bet. He glanced at the door creaking in the wind. Maybe he shouldn't make a break for it. Of course he would see Billy's point. Billy didn't believe Joe's story, but still, he'd find it reassuring if Tom ate some worm too. He'll eat it, Billy was saying to Alan. If he don't, he's chicken, said Alan. After all his talk. Why don't I eat it? Thought Tom. I mean, it's a yucky thing to do, but it wouldn't kill me. He scratched his neck, shifting his seat on the pail. I don't know, thought Tom. I just won't, I guess. He gagged, imagining what it would be like to bite down on a soft, fat, boiled worm. He glanced at the door again. Billy kicked the door shut. Leave it open, said Tom. Why? Because I said so. Yeah, well, you don't own this barn. Neither do you. Your father does. Billy rubbed his nose, watching Tom, figuring. He's trying to pick a fight so he won't have to eat the worm. Okay. Billy opened the door and set a brick against it. Tom shifted his seat on the pail again. He couldn't stop thinking about what it would be like to bite down on a soft, fat, boiled worm. He scratched his ear. Who did Billy think he was? Trying to order the people around, telling them what they had to eat and all. Billy wasn't anybody's father. Tom began to feel put upon and indignant and stubborn. A screen door slammed. Joe coming back with a worm. Tom licked his lips. He heard Joe running across the barnyard toward them. Billy! Alan shouted. Billy spun around just in time to catch a glimpse of Tom pelting out the door banging shut. He flung to the window. Joe sprawled in the middle of the barnyard on his back. Tom was clambering over the wall into the meadow. The frying pan lay upside down beside the horse trough. Chapter 12. The Fifth Worm. Look, said Billy to himself, staring down at the fried worm on the plate. Be sensible. How can it hurt me? I've eaten 4 already. Tom was just scared. He's like that. He eggs other people on, but he never wants to do anything himself. Give up? Asked Alan. Come on, said Joe. We haven't got all day. 5 more minutes, said Alan. Then I win. There's no time limit, said Billy. For the first time, he wondered what he'd do if he lost. Where could he ever get $50? But how could he eat 10 more? Big, fat, ugly, soft, brown things. He couldn't ask his father for $50. He heard Alan and Joe whispering together. He's gonna quit. Yeah, I knew he'd never make it when I bet with him. He talks big. Him and Tom are just the same, but they never do anything. Billy gritted his teeth, glopped on ketchup, mustard, salt, grated cheese, whatever was on the crate, anything, everything, and then grabbed up the worm and tore it apart with his hands, stuffing it into his mouth, chewing and swallowing, gulping. Then, panting, he reached out and wiped his gooey hands on Alan's trousers and grinned mastly up at him and said, There, 5. Chapter 13. Nothing to worry about. That night, Alan asked his father to show him $50. After that, he couldn't sleep, tossing and turning in his rumpled bed. Suppose he lost? He could just see himself asking his father for $50, begging for it, on his knees, tears streaming down his cheeks, and then at Thanksgiving dinner, crying while all his aunts and uncles and cousins rolled over his father's story of Alan's bad. He slid out of bed and snuck down the carpeted hall to his parents' bedroom. You got to wake him, Mrs. O'Hara. You got to, he whispered into the phone. It's an emergency. I got to speak to him. Pause. I got a hoarse throat, Mrs. O'Hara. That's why I'm whispering. Please. Pause. Gee, thanks, Mrs. O'Hara. No, I won't ever call this late again. It's... He waited, gnawing at his thumbnail. A board creaked on the stairs. He stiffened. Silence. What do you want? Said Joe suddenly over the telephone. Geez, I was sleeping. You woke me up. Joe, suppose I lose? My father will never let me take the money out of my savings account. I know he won't. You think I will lose, Joe? Huh? Joe, tell me. Give it to me. Straight, Joe. I got to know. I can't sleep. Joe sighed. Look, I told you this afternoon. You got nothing to worry about. He's cracking sure he ate that one today. Sure he might. Chapter 14. The Pain and the Blood and the Gore. 4 blocks away, Billy suddenly found himself in a brightly lit butcher shop, jostled by a crowd of enormous pigeon-breasted, middle-aged women, shouting to make himself heard over the din of their chatter and the rows of butchers, ordering about the whistle-faced boys, who were lugging hunches and tops of meat in and out of the refrigerator room in the rear. Then a butcher saw Billy jumping among the women and asked for his order, and Billy gave it. And suddenly he was shoved up close to the chopping block, and the butcher slapped down 10 black worms as big as snakes, and Billy tried to say they were too big. He'd choke on them, but the butcher couldn't hear him over the thumbs of his cleaver and the din of the women and the hoarse shouts of the other butchers, and before Billy knew what was happening, he was seated at a table in Longchamp's restaurant on Times Square in New York City with a large napkin tied under his chin, and a waiter was uncovering a platter on which lay one of the huge black worms, coiled snakily, a red rose wobbling in the center of its coils. How can I ever finish it? Said Billy, and cut into a mammoth coil. Streaming pink juice flooded out. Billy ate and ate and ate and ate, and then looked. And he must have eaten more than that. And then he looked again, and there was no hole at all. He had eaten and eaten and eaten nothing at all. And then he felt something cold on his ankles and looked under the tablecloth, and there were 2 more of the huge worms wound around and around his ankles. And then he felt something weighing down his arm, and he looked, and there was another worm wound around his arm, glaring hungrily at him with its bloodshot eyes. And from everywhere in the vast room, winding between the tables, waiters approached, carrying huge silver serving platters. Billy opened his eyes. For the first moment in the moonlight flooding his bedroom, his 2 bare feet, sticking up out of the bottom of the covers, looked like 2 huge white worms' heads. And then he realized that he had been dreaming and sank back onto his pillow, the nightmare melting away. There were no huge worms as big as pythons. He was home in bed. His parents were asleep in the next room. His stomach rumbled. But suppose Joe hadn't been lying? The hair stood up on the back of his neck. Or suppose Joe had made it all up, but had it been right away, without knowing it? A shutter banged. Billy glanced out the window and saw the moon riding among the tossing leaves. His stomach rumbled and gurgled. He groaned. Suppose he was dying? He'd heard of people waking up in the middle of the night with pains in their stomachs, and then as the windows turned gray in the dawn, they died. Toadstools, soured lobster, tainted pork, That was a pain. He clutched his stomach and groaning, half fell, half staggered, out of bed and hobbled toward the door, bent double. Maybe there was an antidote. He whimpered. It didn't hurt a lot, but nothing ever did to begin with, did it?